So we're going to be talking about data as the new oil. And it's an interesting concept because when we think back about oil, you know, it was black liquid in the ground and nobody really knew what to do with it. But now as we move forward with new technologies, we're able to see what that can be turned into, and we're creating gasoline now with this data. And so we're going to be looking at that concept today and trying to understand how you're creating value out of data and then what the advantages is here in France. And what I love about this panel is I've got 3 startuppers. But now one of them is leading research and development for IBM here in France. Harley, welcome. And I wanted to just give you a quick opportunity to talk about what you're working on today, and then how IBM is looking at data today, maybe compared to what it was doing 3 years ago.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Hi, everybody. So, so IBM is really defining itself now as a data company. What we've clearly seen is that the amount of data that is generated from IoT devices, from corporate actions, is really the next natural resource. And that's really been our slogan and our focus for the last year. And what's interesting about data as a concept is that it's really a huge iceberg. There's collecting data, there's storing data in databases, in cloud platforms all over the place. There's managing data with BI systems. And then if you move up the value chain above the water, there's leveraging data, doing big data analysis on it to generate aggregates, doing predictive analytics on it to generate predictive models, and then, the focus of this conference, doing AI, machine learning, and then taking intelligent decisions based on that data. And what we're doing in France is really all about that last part. It's taking intelligent decisions based on all the information we can gather, all the knowledge that we can create out of the data. And what I think is interesting, and what Jason was referring to, is that IBM's work on AI, on intelligent decisions in France, is entirely based on the very first successful AI startup, I think the first AI startup at all in France, a company called Elog, which
you can see that in the brochure, right? Like it's listed in the brochure.
Yeah, the first successful acquisition of an AI startup in France, which was based on really all the work that was done at INRIA in the 80s and 90s on AI. And I think that leads to kind of your second question. The advantage of France for AI and for data generally is the amazing quality of education, the amazing quality of the engineers, the amazing quality of research that goes on here. And the real challenge for France is how to take all that creative innovation and all that very focused learning and turning it into commercial success.
Well, thank you, Harley. And I want to kind of bounce off of that and go to Laurent at Dawex, because you guys are taking data that people don't necessarily know what to do with. They're not sure why they need to keep it. And you're finding new and interesting ways to use that data. So maybe talk to us a little bit about what your method is and how you guys are doing that, and what are some interesting ways those are being used by companies today.
Thank you. With that Dawex, a few words about Dawex. Yeah, Dawex is a global data marketplace where a company meets, buy and sell data directly. We don't buy or sell data. We are a trusted third party. We launched the marketplace 10 months ago, and now we are more than 1,400 companies from startup to corporations.
Wait. So you guys launched 10 months ago, and you already have 1,400 companies helping, giving you access to their data.
Yeah.
And what are you doing with it?
We launched the platform. We started two years ago, and we decided to create, like Airbnb, a marketplace for all company, not for dedicated to data, to start a new business, to understand that data is also an asset of the company that they can monetize. Of course, they decide to monetize because they manage the way they do that, with rule and regulation in each country or economic area, and they do that because they can generate money now.
Through the data.
Yeah.
Right. That's really interesting, and I love that approach of kind of opening up a marketplace. Now I know, Geert, we want to talk a little bit about Saagie and what you guys are doing, because it's a different approach but a similar outcome, right? So you're bringing in your platform and overlaying it on top of databases and helping companies, kind of mine through their own data. Talk to us a little bit about what you guys are working on and how companies are leveraging it today.
Sure. Thank you very much. So what we can see today here is there's a lot of technology, there's a fast pace of innovation, a lot of initiatives, and often it's really, really hard to bring those initiatives to the IT departments. But then you're going to deal with compliance, with security, with technologies that are already validated, architects, etc., etc. So you often find very nice initiative that make it to a proof of concept stage, but you find very few that actually make it to production, and that's where really Saagie comes in, helping companies to build or buy all kinds of data initiatives and bring those into production, operationalize data science, standardize, and make actually applications, smart applications, bring those to the end users. That's what we're doing.
Well, thank you. And it's interesting because we have on this panel, we have IBM who has hundreds, if not thousands, of clients around the world. You guys said you already have 1,400 companies giving you data. You know, you're working with several companies we talked about backstage. And what I'm interested in is how that discussion is changing today when you're talking with your customers around data. Is there still a gap in an understanding of the real value that they possess, or is there a real kind of light that's been going on lately around companies' understanding of data?
I think companies all get that data is valuable, but where they still have a lot of progress to make is how to organize the data, structure the data, make it available for analytic systems and AI systems so you can take advantage of the inherent value that everybody recognizes, but there's a real gap in how you get from what you have, big amounts of unstructured data, to something valuable.
Yeah, I believe it's not only the technology that's playing a part here. It's very much, as we see and experience day to day, it's a people story. How can you make people work together between different departments in companies, in data labs where people are in advance, and with a lot of legacy organization, politics, of course, IT departments that are still living in a century behind. That's the real challenge there, to bring innovation to the end user.
See, and I love you saying that, because at Stringcan we like to say that we're an H-to-H business, human to human, because any of this technology has a human component to it. And so maybe you want to add on top of that, and I want to ask another general question, is you know, people when they hear that their data is being used all these different ways, you know, if you're not in the industry like you are, I think it kind of scares us, like how is this data that we're generating being used kind of, you know, around the world and on the internet? Can you maybe talk a little bit about how you approach this discussion with your clients?
Yeah. We talk in France, so in France we have a leader in industry, aeronautics, travel, automotive, and more and more companies understand that there is a new possibility to open their data. And open their data, it's not open data, it's open data to their ecosystem. For instance, in Germany, German industries organize the exchange of data in industrial data platform. In France, you have medias faced to GAFA. They organize the exchange data between their industry. So it's very new, and we will see later some example maybe.
Great. What about, I mean, I'm sure you're having the same discussions.
I think you're touching a really interesting subject, and we often call this data governance, because it's very nice to have technology, to have the data, but you need to have a metadata layer that kind of manages all those complexity, and often people speak about GDPR, compliance regulations, privacy, anonymization, consent, all these kinds of actions and the data you're going to expose. But that shouldn't be a real bottleneck, because the end result, sharing data, being able to access data from various sources, is still very far away from reality right now.
What are the major barriers today? What would you like to see changed, maybe at the governmental or the societal level, to allow that data to be more accessible?
We strongly believe in the data lab concept. That's where innovation is created, and in those data labs you need to collaborate with research and development, like the gentleman next to me, you need to be able to access data sources, and Dawex is very good at that. You need to have local governments involved, you need to have integrators, system integrators, and you need to have the industry and other end customers that bring up the use cases. And you really, the data labs are for us the key to the future.
Go ahead.
You talk about data as oil, and I think what we're talking about is a pipeline for the oil and a refinery for the oil.
Right.
And you know,
Then
you can't
cars
just
for the
go-
oil to go into, and airplanes, and use cases.
And so it's very difficult to go from the raw oil in the ground to you know, a car that moves. And so all these different things are, you know, helping companies set up the entire pipeline from where the data lives to making it really the fuel for the engine of companies' economy it's the challenge that every company is trying to face. It opens every door in every company right now. And you know, between privacy, security, metadata, organizing data, storing data, and then developing analytics models and putting them in production in transactional systems, there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to monetize the value that's in that oil.
So this is an interesting question, because obviously if we're staying on the oil context, you know, there's certain countries that produce a lot of oil, and there's certain countries that consume a lot of oil and create technologies around what that oil can do. Where is France's advantage in this ecosystem? Is it at every point, or should France be focused on a certain portion of that supply chain? And I'm going to open that up to any of you who think.
Well, from my perspective, where France has the most to offer is on the high end, kind of the last step, how to turn oil or to turn refined petrol into fuel in the engines that make things work. So advanced analytics, things like optimization, machine learning, things that are mathematically grounded is where France has the most inherent value to offer. Fortunately, that's the very visible point. It's the thing it's the entry point for most enterprises into leveraging the data. They see the value of machine learning, seeing patterns in their data, exploiting those patterns. And so where France can, if it meets the challenges that it has in getting that stuff to market, that's where France really has the most to offer.
And would you both agree with that, Geert, Laurent? I mean, it sounds like that's where your companies are.
Yeah, I would add that France has a very good infrastructure for startups. People can take initiatives and can bring that to action. It's still quite hard to convince large corporates to do business with startups. And there's a lot that can change and improve in that perspective. But the people are there, and that's, I think, the most important assets in terms of research and development, in terms of schools and universities. There you have an extremely rich pond to fish from.
Well, I think that's what's interesting about France, too, is you do have the large corporates in a number of large industries, and they're kind of global players, right? And so there's this advantage, I think, for startups to come in and work with a large, diverse ecosystem of large companies. And it sounds like you guys are already doing that, Laurent, with getting them to access their data. What can the French, let's call it the CAC 40, be doing better or different to allow for your flow of data, to allow for better results? Any ideas on that?
We can take an example with, because we talk about AI, if we want to predict air pollution, we need data from the city, and you have different new player like startups who sold devices to citizens, and they collect a lot of data and monetize it. And at the same time, you have smart cities and utilities who deploy a lot of IoT to collect data from air pollution. It's not the same data, it's a little different, but we see that the data collected by a company can benefit to others, and it opens a new market, the data market.
And so, so we're talking about governments, we're talking about businesses. What does the French government need to be talking about today in terms of, making this data more accessible or making it easier for large corporations to make it accessible? Do you guys, let's imagine the administration sitting here listening to you right now. What would you be encouraging them to think about and be talking about?
Well, from my perspective, Macron has made a lot of good initial steps, and there's a lot of things going. If I compare the ecosystem in France for startups now, from when I started in the late 80s, there was nothing. There were no VCs, There were no incubators. There was no private-public cooperation. Now we have an amazing ecosystem. So I would encourage the government to follow the models that have worked successfully in the US and elsewhere. How do universities like Stanford and MIT generate IP and encourage entrepreneurs to bring it to market? How do you leverage a model like Silicon Valley where you bring together VCs, entrepreneurs, and customers and engineers to make a successful ecosystem? A lot of that's happening here. The fact that you guys are all sitting here is an indication that there's been a lot of progress, but certainly there's a lot more that can be made. We're not quite as rich yet in Paris as they are in Palo Alto or even in London, but I think there's a lot of things that are happening, and I would just say keep going, keep going.
Yeah, I would say create the conditions to experiment on data, and that means bring together a lot of different technologies in a single location, and put it very simply, Saagie can help you with that.
Great. And so all of you are thinking about data and its applications. Help us understand what we're going to be talking about next year. I feel like, this is a really good metric for us to come in and start talking about what's happening in AI and big data, because it changes. I mean, last year, I know the subjects that we spoke a lot about, we're not even talking about this year because they're kind of old news, they're already in place and they're running with them now. So what do you see as kind of next year's discussion that's going to be kind of the new commonplace when it comes to big data and the AI space?
Well, I saw a great video by DARPA, the American Advanced Research, the guys who invented the internet. They talked about the first wave of AI that was kind of in the 80s and 90s, which was based on the idea of logic, intelligent systems, explicit reasoning. The second wave of AI that we're in now with machine learning, advanced analytics, predictive analytics, statistical learning. And the next wave, which is going to be a combination of the two, which is taking the amazing patterns we can identify with statistical learning and machine learning, combining it with explicit reasoning to make truly complete intelligent systems that don't just recognize what's going on, but act intelligently in the world. And I think we'll start seeing more of that.
How far away is that? I mean,
it's starting to happen now, which is why I think it's a year's prediction.
Something
year. Like an autonomous vehicle, there's a lot of learning that goes on to identify, how the world works and how you identify the context that the vehicle is operating in. But figuring out what to do in certain situations requires explicit logic and reasoning inside the vehicle, and that kind of combination is what's going to create the next generation of intelligent systems.
And Geert, what about you? I mean, working with your companies, I'm sure they're coming up with new ways to use their data, and they're developing it. What are you thinking is next year's discussion? Ideally,
it should be a lot of end users, companies that have ROIs on data, that have real proof that the investments they make in artificial intelligence actually going to work and make profit for them. And that's the best driver you can imagine.
And Laurent, I mean, you're seeing different companies kind of mixing their data with each other's and finding out new ways to use it, or completely different companies taking their data. Do you see an emergence of deeper co-creation amongst companies? Where are you seeing data? What's your next year's prediction that we're going to be talking about?
We are now seeing emerging new jobs about data monetization in US, and also data hunter, who try to find new and alternative data sources. It's a specific jobs in New York City for hedge funds, but maybe we will see a growing company dedicated to data science and AI in Europe and USA.
I think it all sounds very exciting, and I hope we are talking about all those things next year. I want to thank all of you for joining us here on stage. I hope that was interesting for you, the audience, and I hope you guys have a great lunch. So I want to thank you, Geert, Harley, and Laurent for your time today, and thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks, everyone.